Buongiorno a tutti, vi do il benvenuto alla 19ª edizione della conferenza annuale della Fondazione De Benedetti e lascio immediatamente la parola a Davide Ticchi dell'Università di Ancona e poi all'ingegner De Benedetti.
Come avete visto dal programma doveva parlare il Rettore, purtroppo mi ha chiamato stamattina e ha avuto degli impegni personali urgenti e non sarà presente, si scusa con tutti voi per la sua assenza, se riesce in giornata potrebbe anche essere che capiterà più tardi. Il Rettore è molto contento di questo evento, siamo contentissimi e di aver avuto la possibilità di ospitare oggi questa conferenza e anche il workshop di ieri che è andato benissimo, quindi ringraziamo la Fondazione e tutti i partecipanti a questi due eventi. Il Rettore ieri è venuto a salutare tutti quanti i partecipanti al workshop perché voleva anche capire il tema che si trattava in questi 2 giorni e siamo fermati alla fine a discutere di queste cose. Lui aveva pronto anche un discorso sul ruolo della nostra università come meccanismo di ascensore sociale, quindi aveva dei dati su questo, quindi aveva pronto anche un discorso. Io non conosco questi dati e quindi non posso sostituirlo in questo. L'evento, come vedete, è un evento scientificamente di livello molto alto. Noi vi ringraziamo innanzitutto la Fondazione Rodolfo De Benedetti che ha deciso quest'anno di organizzare questo evento qua e ringraziamo anche tutti voi per la partecipazione. Siccome, come vedete, ci sono delle persone di elevato livello internazionale che hanno sicuramente cose molto più interessanti di me da dire, io non vi rubo altro tempo, lascio la parola all'ingegner De Benedetti e poi dopo al professor Alesina. Grazie mille a tutti quanti per la partecipazione e spero vi troverete tutto quanto molto piacevole e interessante. Grazie.
Grazie professore e ringrazio il Rettore che ci ha dato la possibilità di essere in un posto così sorprendente per chi non lo conosce, ma bellissimo, e quindi penso che i lavori sono sempre più fruttuosi quando si svolgono in un bell'ambiente. Vorrei solo mandare, credo a nome di tutti, un saluto a Tito Boeri che oggi per la prima volta dopo 19 anni è impedito da un impegno personale a essere presente con noi. Ringrazio la mamma Roberta Marcaretti che ci segue da ben 19 anni e che tutti gli anni trova sempre un posto bello, straordinario direi quasi, per tenere il nostro convegno annuale. La Fondazione De Benedetti, in quasi 20 anni di attività, l'anno prossimo sarà il 20°, ha concentrato l'attenzione del dibattito pubblico e accademico su temi rilevanti dal punto di vista sociale ed economico. Questo è stato anche lo scopo della creazione della Fondazione, che era nata per ricordare la figura di nostro padre, di mio fratello e mio, che ha dedicato tutta la sua vita al lavoro e ci sembrava che il miglior modo per ricordarlo e per lasciare una traccia anche nei giovani, nelle generazioni successive, fosse di parlare solo ed esclusivamente di temi che riguardassero il lavoro. Quest'anno è stato scelto mobilità sociale, come voi sapete. Credo che si tratti di un tema di grande attualità dappertutto, viene messo in discussione anche negli Stati Uniti, comunque certamente in Italia. In Italia viene sovente declinato in termini di conflitto intergenerazionale tra genitori e figli. Complice anche la crisi economica di questi ultimi anni, vi è infatti in Italia la diffusa percezione di un peggioramento delle possibilità di riuscita sociale, soprattutto per le generazioni più giovani. Le posizioni di media e politici tendono spesso ad essere ondivaghe. Talvolta sposano la tesi di una giovane generazione che subisce la mancanza di meritocrazia tipica della società italiana e che, al contrario dei più fortunati genitori, si deve accontentare di posizioni sociali e lavorative poco appetibili. Talvolta invece i giovani sono presentati come troppo pigri per andare a caccia delle opportunità offerte dalla società e dal mercato del lavoro. Chiaramente la mobilità sociale è un tema scottante. Lo affrontiamo però con il taglio che caratterizza tutte le iniziative della Fondazione, cioè con l'intento di fornire dati empirici e strumenti conoscitivi che favoriscano un dibattito informato. Infatti la disponibilità di nuove fonti di dati, così come di inedite indagini comparative, ci permetterà oggi di analizzare nel dettaglio realtà e percezioni riguardanti la mobilità sociale in Italia e all'estero. Nel primo studio presentato questa mattina, coordinato dal professor Alesina, che ringrazio caldamente per la sua disponibilità e presenza, scopriremo se le percezioni riguardanti il livello di mobilità intergenerazionale presente nella società italiana corrispondono alla realtà. E lo faremo comparando il dato italiano con quello di altri paesi europei e degli Stati Uniti. Vedremo anche come le convinzioni personali riguardanti la mobilità sociale, nonché il proprio background socio-economico e politico, influenzino le preferenze verso politiche redistributive. Il secondo studio presentato questa mattina ci permetterà invece di ampliare i nostri orizzonti geografici e di includere nell'analisi anche i paesi in via di sviluppo. Abbiamo infatti il piacere di ospitare la presentazione, peraltro in anteprima, dei risultati preliminari del rapporto Poverty and Shared Prosperity 2017, a cura della Banca Mondiale. Il rapporto si concentra sui paesi caratterizzati da elevata disuguaglianza in termini di opportunità e redditi e studia la persistenza dei livelli di istruzione e reddito tra genitori e figli come indicatore di bassa mobilità. Nel pomeriggio lo studio coordinato dal professor Violante analizzerà nel dettaglio la mobilità economica in Italia. L'analisi si avvale di dati amministrativi ricavati dalle dichiarazioni dei redditi di 2 generazioni di contribuenti italiani a confronto, i genitori nati negli anni 40-60 e i figli nati negli anni 70-80. Vedremo così qual è stata la probabilità per la generazione di figli che oggi ha circa 35-45 anni di scalare la distribuzione dei redditi e migliorare così la propria posizione sociale rispetto a quella dei genitori. Vedremo anche quanto la mobilità economica vari tra nord e sud del Paese, mettendo alla luce ancora una volta le forti disparità che caratterizzano il nostro Paese. Non mi dilungherò oltre sugli argomenti. Il nostro intento è come sempre solo quello di offrire risultati rilevanti dal punto di vista di policy, supportati da un serio lavoro di ricerca. Poi ognuno trae le proprie opinioni e le proprie conclusioni. Prima ho concluso per quanto, e io sarò anche breve adesso, ho concluso per quanto riguarda la giornata di oggi. Mio desiderio, e anche nel rispetto delle persone che lavorano alla Fondazione, in particolare il professor Pinotti, che egregiamente la sta conducendo, di accennare brevemente alle molte attività che la Fondazione Rodolfo De Benedetti ha portato avanti nel corso di quest'anno ultimo. Ci siamo attivati su vari fronti. Uno dei temi a cui abbiamo dedicato particolare attenzione negli ultimi mesi è quello dei flussi migratori e dell'accoglienza dei rifugiati richiedenti asilo in Italia. Lo scorso ottobre, ad esempio, Christian Dustman dell'University College of London ha tenuto la 11ª RDB Lecture incentrata sui flussi migratori dei rifugiati a livello internazionale, in particolare sulla crisi dell'area mediterranea. Più recentemente abbiamo instaurato un rapporto di collaborazione con l'ANPAL, la neonata Agenzia per le Politiche Attive del Lavoro, e diverse istituzioni della Regione Piemonte al fine di poter studiare sul campo il funzionamento del sistema di accoglienza italiano. Dallo scorso anno i ricercatori della Fondazione sono coinvolti in un progetto dell'Università Bocconi finanziato da JP Morgan nell'ambito del programma mondiale New Skills at Work. Nell'ambito di tale progetto ci siamo occupati di skill mismatch nel mercato del lavoro italiano e delle inefficienze generate dal dualismo contrattuale per lavoratori giovani e anziani. Voglio infine ricordare il workshop dei fellow della Fondazione, a cui si riferiva prima il professore che ci ospita, che si è tenuto ieri proprio qui a Ancona, grazie all'ospitalità concessa dall'Università Politecnica delle Marche. È un'iniziativa che ci sta particolarmente a cuore perché ci permette di incontrare periodicamente il network di giovani ricercatori che si è creato intorno a noi in questi anni e di rimanere aggiornati sulle loro attività di ricerca. Molti dei nostri fellow sono ricercatori che hanno trascorso presso di noi un periodo di lavoro o collaborato con noi a specifici progetti. Molti di loro studiano o lavorano in alcuna delle migliori università del mondo. Non voglio sottrarre ulteriore tempo, mi auguro che vorrete restare in contatto con noi anche in futuro, vi invito a tenervi aggiornati sulle nostre prossime iniziative, ringrazio tutti i presenti per essere qui oggi e passo la parola al professor Alesina. O non so se è il professor Pinotti forse che darà del...
Grazie ancora al Presidente Carlo De Benedetti, grazie ancora al Professor Ticchi e niente, volevo solo ribadire che penso sia un grande risultato anche parlando sempre di ottiche tematiche di lungo periodo che siamo quasi alla 20ª edizione, sarà la 20ª edizione l'anno prossimo e come diceva il Presidente è la prima in cui non è potuto essere presente con noi Tito Boeri, però niente insomma. Li aspettiamo l'anno prossimo lui e Silvia e non vediamo l'ora di averli ancora tra di noi. E lascio la parola al professor Alesina, adesso passiamo all'inglese, giusto? E dovrebbe essere presente un servizio di traduzione. Ok, c'è un servizio di traduzione simultanea, passiamo all'inglese, anche se Kjetil ho scoperto che parla italiano perfetto con un forte accento pugliese, quindi forse però vabbè mi sa che c'è qualcun altro che... Quindi niente, d'ora in poi il resto della giornata sarà in inglese fino alla tavola rotonda e niente, spero che sia una bella giornata. Ok, esatto, chi vuole la traduzione in simultanea ci sono le cuffie insomma lì fuori. Grazie ancora.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, the Benedetti brothers, for first of all for having the foundation, which has done a fantastic job, and for inviting me. And thanks, Paolo, in particular, for including our paper, which is joined with Stefanie Stantcheva, a colleague of mine at Harvard, and Edoardo Teso, who is a student in our department. Now, this morning when I was having breakfast with Paolo, Paolo told me that the last time I presented a paper, in fact with a joint paper by Paolo and I, he said that I did a terrible job. I looked sleepy and boring. So I hope not to repeat it. But in any case, even if you think I'm sleepy and boring, tell Paolo that I did a great job. Otherwise, he will never write a paper with me again. So this is a paper about intergenerational mobility, so whether children will do better than their parents. So from now on, when I say mobility or social mobility, I really will mean intergenerational mobility. It's a long word, so when I say mobility, that's what I mean. Antivirus. Do we have a virus? No, postpone forse. I think there are perhaps stereotypical views that differentiate Americans and Europeans about fairness and redistribution. And Americans seem to think that the market system, capitalism, is essentially fair, that the American dream is basically alive, namely that you're born poor and you can become rich, that wealth is deserved, is the result of ability and effort, as opposed to poverty, which is due to laziness or inability to take advantage of effort, and effort pays off a lot. Europeans seem to, by Europeans I mean continental Western European, tend to think the opposite, that the capitalism system is essentially unfair. Wealth is due to family history, background, and sticky social classes. And poverty is due to bad luck and society not taking care of you well. And effort may or may not pay off, but even with effort, if you're poor, you're stuck in poverty. In fact, if you, according to the World Value Survey, 70% of Americans versus 35% of Europeans think that you can get out of poverty reasonably easy, so twice as many Americans than Europeans. Yet, intergenerational mobility, according to recent data, is not that much higher. In fact, it's lower in the United States than in Europe, at least according to the data by Kjetil and others, which have become pretty famous. And even though this data by Kjetil and others suggest a big variation within the United States. Now, this different view between American and European may have very deep historical origin. Europe went through hundreds of years of feudalism, where indeed wealth was the result of birth, and social mobility was essentially non-existent, while the US did not go through those hundreds of years of feudalism, and the first reach of the Americans were people that get off of a boat and were poor, and they became rich, namely the American dream. Whether the American dream is alive or not today, that's the subject matter of this paper. So what do we do? So what does this paper do? First, we ask whether people have realistic views about social mobility, comparing people's views with reality. And what are the views of people about social mobility? What are the links between their view about social mobility and what the government should do about it, namely redistribution or equal opportunity policies? And these are correlations. Then we try to establish causality by shifting people's views about social mobility and see how they react, which kind of policy they suggest when we told them, look, social mobility is different than what you think. And we spend quite a bit of time investigating what explains different views amongst people about social mobility and different views about policy intervention. And in order to do that, we collected an original survey for 5 countries, US, UK, France, Italy, and Sweden. The fact that 2 of the authors are French and 1 Italian is only 2 of the authors are Italian and 1 French is only a correlation. We picked this country, the US, because it's the US, Italy because it's an example of a not well working social system. France is the country with the highest spending of GDP per higher government spending over GDP. Sweden is an example of a country with a well working welfare system, and the UK is somewhere between Europe and the US. We collected surveys with the representative sample using commercial companies. These are companies that do surveys as their business. And we have we have about 4,000, you see the number, we have several thousand respondents per country. The main survey was conducted between September and October 2016. And I won't bore you with the detail, but we have done, I think, a good job at ensuring that the survey was well done, and we did several checks and we did several tricks to make sure that the responses were not biased or in any ways. What are the main findings? We find that Americans are way too optimistic about social mobility than reality. They think that the American dream is still alive and much more than it is. On the opposite, Europeans are too pessimistic. They are much more convinced that people are stuck in poverty, even more than they actually are. So there is really an optimism in the US, a pessimism in Europe. People believe that effort matters to get out of poverty, but it's not enough to make you rich. So effort is only partially successful. Those who are pessimistic about social mobility are more in favor of support for redistribution. But interestingly, people actually understand that the response to low social mobility is not ex post redistribution, but to try to offer equal opportunities at birth. And then when we do the experiment and we change views of people about social mobility, we find a very big polarization, namely left-wing respondents, they tend to think that the government should step in and do something about the low level of social mobility with more government intervention. Instead, the right-wingers, even though their views change, when we tell them social mobility is low, that we actually see a change in their views, they tend to think that the government is the problem rather than the solution, and they want to have even less government intervention. So we find a very strong polarization of views in every country, and particularly in the US. Okay. So there is a big related literature, some of which produced by people in this room, which I will not cover because I don't have much time, and it's boring. So let me talk about then we talk about what we do first. First, we want to have data on actual intergenerational mobility. And for this country, we use the best available data. For the US, we have the administrative tax return data by Kjetil. For Italy, we actually have very similar data. And this afternoon, we'll hear the new version of this data. But we used the author of this afternoon paper were kind enough to share them with us. And I understand that they're not that different from the early version they gave us. And for Sweden, we have basically almost a complete sample. And for UK and France, we have some more limited surveys, but these are the best data available for the actual intergenerational mobility. So what do we do in the survey? First, we ask background questions to the respondent, of course. Then we investigate their views about whether they think that society, market system and capitalism is fair or not, and what explains difference in income. We ask them about perception of intergenerational mobility in their own countries. We ask them what they want to do about it, what kind of policy they think they are relevant. And then we ask also a broad set, set of questions about their views about government to understand whether there are those who think that the government is the solution or the government is the problem of low social mobility. And then we do a randomized information experiment to shift people's views about social mobility and to see how they react. So this is the key question about eliciting beliefs about social mobility. We tried many different questions, but we thought that this one was the one that worked better. But again, I don't have much time to go into that. We tried to do a survey that was very easy to understand with a lot of pictures and things, and we were actually surprised by the good quality of the responses that we get. Good quality in the sense of responses that were not inconsistent, things that needed to add to 100, did indeed add to 100, and we were actually quite surprised. Despite the length and the relative complexity of the survey, we were quite surprised by the quality of the responses that we got. So this is the question about eliciting views about social mobility. And this is the question. For the following question, we focus on 500 families that represent the US population, or of course the other countries' population. We divide them into 5 groups on the basis of their income, with each group containing 100 families, so quintiles. The groups are the poorest 100 families, the second poorest 100 families, the middle 100 families, the second richest 100 families, and the richest 100 families. In the following question, we will ask you to evaluate the chances that children born in one of the poorest 100 families, once they grow up, will belong to any of these income groups. Please fill out the entries to the right of the picture below and tell us, in your opinion, how many of these 100 children, of the poorest children, will make it to the various quintiles. And this is the picture, so a ladder, which we tell them how many of the 100 children will make it to the top, second, third, and fourth, and we force the total to be 100. Okay. Now, we did various experiments, and with this, in some cases, we told them what is for their country, what is the level of income that separates the various quintiles. The results were not very different. We alternated the order. Sometimes we started from the top, sometimes to the bottom. The result did not change. but I won't bore you with the detail. In order to check these questions are quantitative. In order to check, these answers are quantitative, but in order to compare them, we also ask qualitative questions like, about mobility. Do you think that a child from the poorest under family will grow to be among the richest families that are close to zero, low, fairly high, or high? So these are qualitative questions. We ask what we refer to as the American dream question. How do you feel about the following statement? In country X, everybody has a chance to make it and be economically successful. And then we also ask the same question that we saw before with the ladder, adding the sentence that the children put a lot of effort in school and at work to see whether effort matters or not. Then we ask questions about policies. We ask questions about, and we try to be precise, we ask questions about the progressivity of the tax system. So we tell them for a given total amount of revenues, how much should be paid by the top 100%, the top 10%, the next 40, and the bottom 50. So a question about the progressivity of the tax system. Then we ask questions about budget allocation. We tell them how much of a budget should be allocated in various things. We identify as, we ask them without telling them what we simply told them defense, security, infrastructure, education, and so on. We then identified equal opportunity policies as education and health, redistributive policies, social insurance, and income support, and others, defense and infrastructure, and then we see how these people respond. We also asked about an estate tax, inheritance tax, because it has received quite a bit of attention in some countries. And then we ask qualitative questions about whether they support equal opportunity policies. And then we ask questions about what they think about the government in general, whether they trust the government, and you will see some amazingly discouraging result about whether they trust the government in some countries, including our own, and whether the government as a tool to address the question of social mobility or not. So this is the survey. So let's start with mobility perception and mean perception. A way of summarizing the result is this one. On the horizontal axis, you see the real probability that you are stuck in the first quintile. Namely, so if you read for the US, it's about 33%. For the UK, it's about 31%. For France, it's about 30%. For Italy, it's about 28%, and for Sweden, it's about 26%. So this is the higher this probability of being stuck in poverty, the less mobility there is. And so if you are on the 45-degree line, you are right, of course. And if you are below the 45 line, you are optimistic because you think that the probability, you think that your perceived probability is actually lower than the real probability. So the US is optimistic, slightly optimistic, and all the European countries are way over pessimistic about the probability of being stuck. Those differences are statistically strongly significant, and so Europeans are pessimistic. This is the opposite. This is the probability of moving from the to the bottom quintile to the top quintile, the American dream. So the real probability goes from around 11%, roughly around 11% in Europe, to about 7% in the US. So there is much less mobility measured this way in the US. But nevertheless, the Americans are very optimistic. They think that the real probability is close to 12%, even though in reality it's 7%, and Europeans are pessimistic. So looking at both ways, Americans are optimistic and Europeans are pessimistic. And those results are very much consistent with the qualitative question. But if you ask people, do you think that do you think that the chances of becoming rich are high if you're born poor, or high is low, high, low, somewhere in between. Those qualitative answers, which I will not show you for lack of time, are very consistent with this quantitative answer on quintiles. So who is pessimistic? So this is a table that took me half an hour to figure out how to read it, but if you look at male, for example, so the blue regards the answer of males, and the red regards the answer of females. So the blue is always the one that refers to the children, young, the characteristic listed as the blue, and this is the measure of pessimism. The higher the higher the indicator means, the more pessimistic you are in terms of staying at the bottom quintile. So male are more pessimistic. People with children are less pessimistic. And interesting, from an American perspective view, African American are more optimistic than white. So this is something that we want to explore more in a follow-up paper. The rich are actually more pessimistic than the poor, and that, again, worth to be explained. Perhaps the rich feel like, yeah, I know it's difficult and I made it, so I'm good. And the one thing I want to emphasize is the bottom one, left wing, namely leftists are in every country, leftists are more pessimistic than rightists about social mobility. So if you're a leftist, you think that it is impossible to get out of poverty. If you're a rightist, you think that is more likely so. Role of effort, I won't go into much detail for the lack of time. In all the surveys, everybody thinks that effort is important to increase social mobility, but to make you get out from poverty to the middle class. But there is not, people don't believe that only with effort you can become really rich, so even in the US. So I think that the role of effort is to help people get out of poverty, but it doesn't really explain people really making it big. There has to be something else. Now, an interesting something that I was actually talking to Luciano a moment ago, which may be relevant also for Italy, we'll hear this afternoon. But one thing that is very interesting for the US is that there is a lot of variation in actual social mobility in the US. This is a map of actual social mobility in the US. Darker color means more mobility. The north-northwest, there is a lot of social mobility in the US, and the south-southeast, much less. And in fact, so the north-northwest looks like Europe, the south-southeast looks much worse than Europe. Incidentally, there are a lot of maps of the US that look like this. If you look at a map of trust is high in the north-northwest, is low in the south-southeast. Racial fragmentation is high in the south-southeast, low in the north-northeast. Essentially, everything which is good is the north-northwest, and everything which is bad in the south-southeast, roughly speaking. So the same applies to social mobility, is high in the north-northwest and low in the south-southeast. These are Kjetil's data. Now, these are the perceived probability of moving from the bottom. These are the perceived probability of social mobility, the probability of moving from the bottom to the top. And as you can see, and the darker column is higher probability. We know that on average Americans are over-optimistic, but you can see an almost perfect negative correlation between these two maps, so that optimism is particularly high in the south-southeast, and pessimism is particularly low in the north-northwest. And in fact, these are data of the one on the right is simply the ratio of the perceived. So the one on the right-hand side is the actual number, and the one on the right-hand side are the perceived probability of moving from the bottom to the top. And you can see almost perfect negative correlation. And in fact, this is the ratio between the two, the ratio of perceived probability over real probability, and which is a measure of optimism. And as you can see, the optimism is concentrated in south-southeast, and while the north-northwest is pessimistic. This is something that we want to explore in a follow-up paper, to go into much more detail about what local conditions affect perception. We have already some result at the city level, but I won't go into that, but that's certainly something which is worth emphasizing. And the reason why I was mentioning this afternoon paper, because as I understand it from Luciano, even in the US, even in Italy, there's going to be a big geographical variation of social mobility, and there may be some interesting analog here to explore. Now, perception of mobility and policy preferences. These are some examples. So on the bottom line is the perception of staying in the bottom quintile. So a higher number means more pessimism, and these are mean regressions. So every dot represents a set of data. And this is the tax rate, the highest tax rate for the top 1%. You see a very strong positive correlation. More pessimistic people, those who believe that social mobility is low, they want to tax the rich more. On the right-hand side is optimism. What is the percentage that you think is the probability that you think people have to move from the bottom to the top? So the horizontal axis is a measure of optimism, and you have a strongly negative correlation between optimism and progressivity of the tax system. And this is the same thing for the bottom tax rate. If you are a pessimist, you want a lower tax rate for the bottom. If you are a pessimist, if you're an optimist, you want to have less progressivity. This is the correlation between what we define as equal opportunity policy, namely what is the share of government spending that people want to spend on education and health. So again, pessimism is the probability of staying in the bottom quintile. The more pessimist you are, the more you want the government to spend in education and health. And on the right-hand side, the more optimistic you are, the less you want the government spend on this. And interestingly, there is actually a much weaker correlation with policy that we define safety net, so ex-post redistribution. So respondents seem to actually understand quite well that the response to low social mobility is not necessarily more ex-post redistribution, but more equal opportunity policies like education. And this is a result that comes out from many things that we do. Now, however, these correlations are mostly driven by left-wing respondents. So here we separate I won't go into the detail, but essentially those strong correlation between progressivity of the tax system and spending, they are the result of responses of the left wing. So if you are a left-winger and you are a pessimist about social mobility, you want more government intervention. If you are a right-winger and you are pessimist about social mobility, you don't particularly want more government intervention. And of course, in the survey, we define right-wing and left-wing in a way which is appropriate for the different countries. And we emphasize being right-wing or left-wing for economic matters. The only time in which the right-wingers, they see some role for government intervention is when you ask them, suppose that for those right-wingers who think that social mobility is low, even though poor people put a lot of effort into try to work hard. But in general, the policy response of right-winger is to do very little, and we'll see the reason why in a second. While for the left-winger, the response to low social mobility is more government. Now, these are interesting results. Once we got this result in the first round, we thought, where does this difference between right-winger and left-winger comes? It must come from what the different respondents think about the government. So we asked a lot of questions about what they think about the government. Here is some of them. These are questions about, do you think in your country the economic system is fair? And these are, we started to be shocked. These are the various countries. In Italy, About 10% of the respondents think that the economic system is fair. In the US, 50% think that the economic system is fair, and more than 60% in Sweden think that the economic system is fair. And we have the feeling that in America, 50% think that the economic system is fair because they think that the markets are fair. In Sweden, we probably think that because they think that the welfare system makes the system fair. And in France, they are not doing much better than Italy. They only think 20% of French think the market system is fair. The American dream alive, namely the question, do you think people born poor can make it rich? Again, less than 10% in Italy think that if you're born poor, you can make it rich. About 20% in France, and more than 50% in the US. Effort is the reason for being poor, is 50% in the US and less than 20% in Italy. Effort is the reason for being rich, 40% in the US and less than 20% in Italy. Again, this was across country, this right versus left is everywhere. The right wing think that the economic system is fair, economic dream is alive, and the left does not. So strong polarization between left and right, but again, perhaps even more surprising is the difference between countries. Role of, as the government the tool to do something about it, the question is, what the percentage of people who never trust their government? Essentially, only 10% of the Swedes never trust their government. 40% of French and about almost 40% of Italian never trust their government. Notice that never trust their government is very strong. The question is, do you trust the government? Never. It was never, sometimes, middle of the road, a lot. So never was really the bottom of 5 potential answers. The question is that government has no tools to do something about social mobility. Well, most countries, except for France, they think that a majority of people think that the government has some tools, perhaps not in France. Everybody thinks that unequal opportunity is a problem, so unequal opportunity is no problem, the one before the bottom. Only everywhere, less than 20% of the people think that equal opportunity is no problem. So people feel that unequal opportunity is a problem, but as you can see, they have very, particularly on the right, they have very pessimistic view about whether the government can do anything about it. And more generally, do you have negative views about your government? Well, I'm afraid to say that 90% of French have a negative view about their government, and 70% of Italians have a negative view. Now, the question were formulated in a way which we meant to ask the respondent not about this particular government that they are facing when they are answering, but in general, the government as an institution. Of course, we don't know what the respondent answered, but the question was not formulated, do you like the Renzi government, or do you like Trump? It was formulated that do you like the government as an institution, but of course, we don't know what went in there. So the bad views about government are particularly concentrated in the right, but pretty well spread on the left. But clearly, there's a big difference right-left. Namely, the right tend to have more negative views about the government than the left. Okay, then, so these are the correlation. Now we do the little randomized perception experiment, and we want to study a causal relationship between shifting people's views about social mobility and what happens to their views. So this is so in order to decide what, this was a bit complicated because we wanted to shift the perception of people in the same direction, because otherwise if you make some more optimistic, some more pessimistic, you are imposing a symmetry of response that may not be there. So we wanted to move them all in the same direction. So either make everybody more pessimistic or make everybody more optimistic. Since we know that Europeans are already pessimistic and Americans are already optimistic, by moving them in the same direction, we have to move one of the two away from reality because we are making them even more pessimistic than they actually are. So we chose to make everybody more pessimistic, which means for Americans, moving them closer to the truth, for the Europeans, making them even more pessimistic than they actually are. And so this is what we do with this. First of all, we show that these are results that come from Harvard University to give them some, possibly some respectability in what we show them. I don't know whether that worked or not, but now this is technology. So this is the little thing that they say. I'm supposed to do something now. Okay, so this is the treatment that I like to call the little movie. So this little movie worked, namely that the first stage treatment on perception worked. So when we asked respondents who have, so to half of the respondents we showed the movie, to half of them we didn't. When after the movie we asked the respondent what they thought about social mobility, namely, again, the probability of moving from Q1 to Q1 to Q1 to Q2 and so on, with that ladder question that you saw at the beginning, we saw that the movie had a strong effect, namely that those who have seen the movie were much more pessimistic than those who had not seen the movie about social mobility. And the effects are quite large, and and interestingly, they work both for the left and for the right. Namely, both left-wing respondent and right-wing respondent had moved their perception about social mobility low when they've seen the movie. In fact, for the right wing, it's even stronger than for the left wing. Then we redid the survey a week later to see whether the effect of the little movie was just suggestion or something that were passing and going. And I understand from survey that a week is already a lot. But in any case, after a week, we redone the survey on the same respondent, and without showing them the movie again. And we saw that those who had seen the movie a week earlier are still more pessimistic about mobility than those who had not seen the movie. So a week later, the results were persistent. And this is the first survey I ran, but those who have run more surveys, they tell me that it's quite sort of heartwarming that it lasted for a week. So what is, I forgot to mention something that we also asked the movie had an effect not only about the question about perception of mobility, but a fortiori had a movie about the question of mobility with effort. So people became more pessimistic about success in life with or without effort. And that holds both for the right and for the left, and holds 1 week later. Then we asked a question about policies, namely we see whether those who had seen the movie and that had become more pessimistic about social mobility are more likely to want more government intervention. And these are the result of our regression. So the treatment, if you have been treated and you are left wing, the first coefficient, 0.023, tells that you are significantly more likely to want a larger fraction of the budget spent on what we call equal opportunity policy, which means education and health. And I should say that we have been careful in asking those policy questions in a way which make it very, very clear that there is no free lunch. So we made it very, very clear that if you want to spend more on education, that means spending less in something else, because we gave them a total budget to allocate. And we made it very clear to tell them that if you want to raise taxes, if you want to spend more, they need to raise taxes. And then we asked them, how do you want to raise taxes? So we were actually very, very clear in avoiding that people say, oh yeah, we want to spend more on education, more on infrastructure, more on everything. So we actually are quite confident that we asked those questions, avoiding free lunches. So left-wing support a higher, so they want more equal opportunity policies. They want higher estate tax. More generally, they want government intervention. They see unequal opportunity as a serious problem after they've seen the movie. Interestingly, they don't seem to want more budget safety net, at least it's not significant. So we find very interesting that people seem to really get the point, not get the point, they seem to really think that the answer to social mobility is not only or mostly taxing the rich to give to the poor, but is more providing equal opportunity policies. For the right-winger, there is basically nothing. The right-winger don't want, all these coefficients are insignificant. The right-winger that have seen the movie, they don't want to do anything. And in fact, the last coefficient, which is significantly negative, which is about the question, do you think the government has the tool to reduce social mobility? The right-winger who have seen the movie, they seem to become more negative about whether the government has the tool of reducing social mobility, perhaps thinking that the government is the problem, not the solution. So we have this interesting effect, which is, this is a quote from a book that is become quite famous, almost a cult in the US, which is this book about hillbilly elegy of some guy who was born in West Virginia and make it big in Wall Street, and is the story of he came out of poverty. And there is a quote with this book that says, the message of the right is increasingly, it's not your fault if you're a loser, it's the government's fault. So, what I think we find in this experiment is that both the left and the right are affected by our treatment, namely that they become more pessimistic about social mobility, but they have a very different reaction. The left wants more government intervention, even if they already wanted a lot, but they want even more, and the right, they want even less, because their views about government worsen. So we have a polarizing effect of this treatment: more government for the right, and more government from the left, and less government for the right. It's a little bit like preaching to the choir, or preaching to those who those who don't believe. So the left is the choir that is really willing to listen to the government. The right is never going to listen to anything that the government does. And this is the result. This polarization, left and right, is actually really permeates through all our survey. So to conclude, I think that we found inaccurate perception of social mobility. Incidentally, this inaccurate perception can be tested when we have better data for other countries. Well, for the US, they're already pretty much perfect actual data on the best that we can get for international mobility. This afternoon we'll have the perfect data for Italy, but other countries can be improved. But we can always compare our responses to the new data that may come out. We find a big polarization effect between left and right, and we find this very interesting geographical pattern, which, as I understand it, we will see for Italy as well, that there is a lot of within-country geographical difference about real and perceived social mobility, which is something worth looking into. And Stefanie and I and another student, we are actually working now on a related paper which we want to link racial issues to perception of social mobility, and immigration issues and perception of social mobility and preference for redistribution, given that immigration is critical both in Europe and in the US, and in some countries, mostly in the US, in addition to immigration, there is also a racial issue relating to poverty and social mobility. Thank you. How did I do, Paolo?
So it was great. So now I understand that you give boring presentations just when you present our joint papers, which
our joint papers are boring.
It's bad news for me, but I think it's great news for this audience. And now I would invite Kjetil to discuss the paper. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation to come. Thanks for the invitation to be here and to read this very interesting paper, which was also very well presented.
Paolo, did you hear that?
I say that.
My work is mainly in development economics. Most of my work is in field experiments in Africa, so some of you may wonder why me, and I think the reason is that I'm in fact the only Norwegian economist who has a trullo, École Mil Trullo, in Puglia, in Valle d'Itria. And it's always a pleasure to be here in Italy. Now, I enjoyed reading the paper a lot. I don't know if I have that much to say. I will summarize some of the findings. Then I will talk a bit about some work that we're doing in Bergen, where I'm from. And then I'll sort of wrap up with some thoughts about questions which remain to be resolved. So to this paper, this is the ladder, the income ladder, and some are on top and some are on the bottom. And the policy question is, should the ones on the bottom get some help to move up the ladder? And the answer to this question really depends on three questions. Why don't they climb up the ladder themselves? Can't they move up by themselves? And that's about beliefs about how easy it is to climb this income ladder. And then there's a question about policy preferences, fairness preferences. Even if it's difficult to climb the ladder, is it really a problem that some are on the top and some are on the bottom? How unfair is the system? And then the third one is, okay, maybe we think about inequality as a problem, then what can we really do about it? Do we really believe that the government can do something about it? How costly is it to help people move up the ladder? So both beliefs about mobility, fairness preferences, and so the efficiency equality trade-off matters in policy preferences for redistribution. Now, this is the wonderful picture about that Professor Alesina showed us about in the survey in 5 countries what people perceive the intergenerational income mobility to be. So starting from being born in a very poor family, how likely do you think it is that the children of this poor family will move up the ladder? So on this basis, they can form ideas about what people think about income mobility. And there's some striking findings here. As Professor Alesina just told us, Americans are more optimistic than Europeans about mobility. So the American dream is alive. In fact, Americans are too optimistic, and in particular, Europeans are far too pessimistic about mobility. And a result which I don't think you highlighted is that in optimism in America is particularly strong in states where actual mobility is low. So in the southeast, where mobility is low, that's where optimism, that's where the American dream is alive the most. So super interesting results. Turning to a bit, I'll return to this, but let me promote the research that we're doing in Norway. And this is from The Guardian a few weeks back, our study, suggesting that US citizens are more likely than Scandinavians to see inequality as fear could explain Donald Trump's win. Are Americans more ready to accept inequality? In fact, I'm part of a research group called the Choice Lab, located at the Norwegian School of Economics, and we do research on fairness and rationality, doing experiments both in the lab and in the field. My field experiments mostly in Africa. And just for more bragging even more, we just received a big grant from the Norwegian Research Council to develop our research on inequality further. So we have this research program on fairness, which we will pursue during the next 10 years with the substantial support from the Research Council of Norway. So I hope we'll be able to do a lot of interesting research on this topic in the future as well. Okay, so this study I was going to promote is actually by three friends of mine, colleagues at the Norwegian School of Economics, Ingvild Almås, Alexander Cappelen, and Bertil Tungodden. And I think it nicely complements the study by Professor Alesina and co-authors. This particular study, it focuses on fairness preferences. And it also uses nationally representative samples using survey companies, comparing here Norway and the United States. We use a slightly different approach. We use incentivized experiments, so real money is at stake. And we have, in this experiment, workers, 2,000 pairs of workers, and then we have what we call spectators, who are the decision makers in terms of redistribution. And the experiment is such that the workers will work on a task, and then the spectators will decide on how to distribute the gains from this task. There are three treatments in this experiment. There's the luck treatment, where after this task, the workers will get a reward, which is either high or low, $0 or $6, and who gets what is just based on chance. So worker A is lucky, gets 6, worker B gets 0 for conducting this task. So inequality based on luck. The second treatment is what's called the merit treatment, and then it's such that the higher performing worker on this effort will get 6, so A will get 6, and then the lower performing worker will get 0. So then the difference is based on productivity, on merit. Then we have the third treatment, which is the efficiency treatment, which is the same as in the luck treatment, so flipping a coin. But then on top of that, it's costly to redistribute. So if you want to, as a spectator, to redistribute from the €6 person to the $0 person, it costs money. Now, in this experiment, spectators had no information about the nationality of the workers, if they're Norwegian or American, but otherwise they're fully informed about everything, about the source of inequality, and so on. So we eliminate differences in beliefs as a source of differences in outcomes. We isolate preferences. And the question then is, are fairness preferences different in the United States from Norway? And so I'll show you. So we have here on the vertical axis, we have inequality implemented. So how much inequality do you accept? And United States and Norway. And here we have the luck treatment, the merit treatment, and the efficiency treatment. So if we start with the luck treatment, this is how the spectators, the American spectators, how much inequality they were willing to accept in the case where differences in income were purely based on luck. Flip a coin, worker A gets 6, worker 0 gets 0, worker B gets 0, and this is how much inequality they are willing to accept. Now let's compare that to Norway. How much inequality are we willing to accept in Norway? and we see that much less. Okay? So Americans are much more willing than Norwegians to accept inequality when the source of inequality is luck. What about merit? In this case, remember, the source of inequality is productivity. The higher, the high earner is high earner because he or she has been more productive. Now, in this case, the Americans are willing to accept more inequality. It's because it seems reasonable. It's based on merit rather than luck. Interestingly, the same goes for Norwegians. So still less than Americans, but also Norwegians respond to the merit factor. So it's not like Norwegians are always egalitarian. The source of income matters. So we are more willing to accept inequality when the source of inequality is productivity. And the third treatment is about efficiency. So to what extent does it matter that redistribution is costly? And in fact, if we look at both Norway and the United States, and here comparing luck with efficiency, because the difference between luck and efficiency is just that in the efficiency it's costly to redistribute. There's not much difference at all between luck and efficiency, meaning that people really don't care about the costliness of redistribution. So that's also interesting. Now, a key question, looking at these two papers together, and the key question is why isn't there, it is one important question, is why isn't there more pressure for redistribution in the United States? Inequality is much higher in the United States. Why isn't there more pressure for redistribution in the United States? And I would say in the paper by Professor Alesina and co-authors, they really stress the beliefs factor that the American dream is still alive. So people believe that it's easy to climb the ladder. So, why should you redistribute? The poor people will be on top soon anyway, and the ones that don't climb, but they don't climb because they are basically lazy. And they start the paper by quoting John Steinbeck, the poor are just temporarily embarrassed millionaires. We are poor now, but for sure, and we're perhaps embarrassed by it, but we are soon going to be millionaires. The second factor is about preferences, and that's the one stressed by my friends in Norway. And also emphasized by Professor Alesina. Basically, the Americans think about the system as fair. And luck or bad luck is just part of the game. So there's more acceptance of inequality, even if inequality is based on luck, bad luck. So then to my thoughts about this, and on the question of why isn't there more political pressure for redistribution in the United States, and then many of you, I guess, are familiar with this book by Thomas Frank, What's the Matter with Kansas? It's a wonderful book. And it really brings sort of politics into the equation. Because political choice, voting for parties, is about more than just economics. And social values matter too. And I would claim that in times of distress, of stagnation, traditional values, social values, religion, will become even more important. And for some reason, I think it's very interesting and something to be analyzed even more carefully, like in a political economy framework, is, so it seems like in America, the Republican Party has really captured this social value agenda. It's the party of conservative values. It's the party, guns and abortion and gays and school prayer. The Republican Party is the party for conservative values. And as part of that conservative agenda is the belief in free markets. Free markets is part of that package. And the Democratic Party, which should be more, pro-poor, they are stamped as liberals and cafe latte generation and out of touch with the real Americans. And so the working class people in America, including in Kansas, they will vote Republican for their values, even if the Republicans is a more pro-poor, pro-rich party. So the working class of Kansas is actually voting against their own economic interests, but they're voting with for the party which is more in harmony with their social values. And you may speculate that there may be a vicious circle here, in fact, where the poor or the working class will vote for the pro-rich party, which will then cement this poverty, and then with the poverty there will be increased emphasis on traditional values, which again will feed into this loop of traditional values and poverty. So you may end up in a kind of vicious political economy circle where the poor will remain poor and they will vote for the pro-rich party. Just a few remaining questions. So this is my last slide. And you hinted at it as, you know, the history and culture. So why do beliefs differ so widely between the United States and Europe? And in fact, why do beliefs differ so much within the United States? Why are fairness norms so different? Why are Americans much more willing to accept the system as it is and accept inequality based on luck than Europeans? And why does the United States choose Trump and protectionism, whereas, for instance, France has chosen Macron and openness? I think these are fascinating questions, not questions that can be addressed in one paper, but I think it's interesting questions for future research. And again, thanks a lot for giving the ability to read the paper, and I look forward to this discussion. And in fact, if you would like to receive this paper I talked about, but that's again about Norwegians and Americans, feel free to contact me, and I will make it available to you. Thanks a lot.
So thank you for the discussion. So I will leave like 5 minutes to Alberto if you want to reply or say something, whatever you want. And then we can also take some questions from the audience, okay?
Well, thank you very much for this very kind discussion. I wish all my discussions were so kind. But let me say a couple of random things. On the first part of merit versus luck, your experiment is very interesting, and it confirms actually a broad literature done on experiment, on actual data, that people are much more willing everywhere to accept more inequality when it comes from effort, and are less willing to accept inequality when it comes from luck. That's true everywhere. And the other result, which also confirmed previous work, that Americans are more willing than European, particularly Northern European, to accept inequality. Now, the second question is, so you say, why that is the case? And here, let me, since you advertise your work, let me advertise my own work now. In fact, it's a work supported also by the De Benedetti Foundation. About 10 years ago, I gave the De Benedetti lecture, from which a book with Ed Glaser came out called Fighting Poverty in the U.S., A World of Difference, which is in Italian, published by La Terza. And we talk about some of the issues that you talk about. Why is it that Americans are so different from Europeans in terms of their acceptance in inequality, their view that the economic system is fair, and so on. And we think, based on the works of many others, we think that this goes back to much before Trump or Macron or any of that. It goes back to the history of the two places. As I mentioned, 100 years of feudalism in Europe and no feudalism in the US. And incidentally, even Karl Marx and Engels had the same view, namely they were very correctly, they were very intuitively, they were very pessimistic about the communist revolution in the US, because they knew that in the US inequality was much more acceptable and people were much less upset about inequality because they did not have this history of this different history. And the other aspect, which you did not mention, but we also talked about in the book, is that racial differences. I mean, in the US, inequality is associated, poverty is associated with race, and a huge literature suggests that generosity travels much better within ethnic group, within religion. So homogeneous society tend to have larger welfare state than less homogeneous society, and that's why the issue of immigration comes about as very relevant. Regarding Trump and Macron, that would certainly be a long story. Certainly, what you say about the Republican Party is certainly true. Nevertheless, I do think that these different views about, that count out from your paper as well, these different views about tolerance of inequality and lack of tolerance of inequality in Europe goes way back, before Trump, before the current Republican Party, and that's really, I think, deeply ingrained in different history of the two places, and certainly religion plays a role too.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, so there are already some questions. One here, another one here.
Gianluca Violante. I have a couple of questions which are suggestions mostly. So first, I found really fascinating the result that the beliefs that people have tend to be a bit misaligned with reality to a large extent, and I think it's kind of worth asking clearly where these beliefs come from if you want to do something to affect them somehow. And it's important, I think, to distinguish whether they come from what people read in the newspapers or they see through the media, or what they experience themselves individually. So I wonder whether it would be useful to maybe add a question in the survey asking whether the individual themselves.
We do the question, and people who have had experience of upward mobility are more optimistic. Yeah.
Are more optimistic.
But we don't know whether it's the only reason. But
yes.
But yeah, we could. Yeah, but we have that question.
Okay. So, but doing maybe okay, great. Okay. So the second thing is that so I think it's also important to distinguish between growth and aggregate growth. So sort of the tide that lifts all boats, so to speak, and social mobility and intergenerational mobility, social mobility in general. Because obviously, I mean, you can have a society with high growth rate and very little social mobility, and one with not much growth and a lot of social mobility. So I wonder whether people do understand this difference, and whether it's worth exploring with questions whether what they would favor, because the policies that they seem to favor in a way, which are education and health, are also pro-growth policies. So I wonder whether this distinction is clear in their head, and also what are their preferences essentially.
Well, I have 3 questions. I try to group them. The first one, 3. I try to group them. The first one is about this pessimism and optimism. I mean, if Giovanni made me notice that the real mobility is not quantitatively very different. So if you have very differences in beliefs, in whether you are pessimistic or optimistic, then this could explain the little change in the degree of mobility, even though the system were equally working at the same level of mobility.
Sorry, when you say they're not very different, you mean the difference?
I mean, we look at some number at the beginning, the first slides.
No, but you mean perception and reality, or
perception and reality? In the reality, it depends
what you mean by.
I mean, when, for example, if you say
in the US, the probability you get it to the top in the US is 50% bigger than reality. It's 12 rather than 7.
12 rather than 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it depends.
In reality, this one.
No, 12 is what people perceive in the US.
No, I mean, what matters is the real one. So what I saw the numbers of real moving from one ladder to another was very few percentage points.
That's what I'm asking. You're comparing the difference between countries of reality.
Exactly. Okay. In reality, the difference is very small, okay? And beliefs are larger. So the point is, you could have a situation where the country work at the same level of mobility, but given that I'm optimistic, I put more effort, so at the end, the realization is that I have more mobility, the little few percentage point. So it's not a problem of the system, it's self-fulfilling prophecies, okay? And another issue maybe related to this, and of course, the degree, the income distribution matters. If I am in a society which is very unequal, then this possibility, I may have a big increase in income, but then it's in quintiles much more difficult. And also think in these terms. I mean, when I think about mobility from one quintile to another, then one thing is that I may have a society where it's easy to move at the beginning of the quintiles. So if I'm very poor, then I can get a good job, but it may be very difficult to be in the top 1%, to be a successful entrepreneur. In other society, this change may be more smooth. So it would be interesting to understand this. And the last question is about left and right. So I think it's very interesting to understand, I mean, how these people think in left and right, but here there is a self-selection issue. I mean, people that are left wing or right wing, they are different along a number of dimensions, from their income, their educations, their skills, their social values, and many other things. So it would be interesting to understand these effects. I mean, other things equal. So you take two people that have the same skills, same education, same profession, and so, but have just different beliefs in left and right, and see how this change in terms of beliefs and beliefs about mobility. These were my 3 questions.
Okay. I think maybe...
As you wish.
Maybe you can answer these first batch of questions, and then we collect others. Okay, so
you're the boss.
Huh?
You're the boss. On the first question by Luciano on growth versus relative position, certainly is an issue. We try to make it as clear as possible to the respondent that we're asking relative position rather than growth position. How much that was clear to them is not obvious, but we certainly had made it as clear as possible. Incidentally, we also gave them and it made not much difference, suggesting that to some people we asked them only the quintile. To some people we gave them the income level of the quintile. It don't make any difference. And just something that I meant to say in my presentation, but I forgot. When I say, for example, the U.S. moving to the top quintile, some people, including myself, when we were thinking about it, I said, "Oh, top quintile! Oh my God!" Stop thinking about top 1%. Top quintile. I see Luciano smiling. Top quintile means a family of 4 making more than $105,000 a year. So that's not super wealthy. So it's not crazy to think that if you're born poor, which is below 25,000, you can make it. When you say top quintile, don't think top 1%. On David's question, his question about perception and reality and self-fulfilling expectation is like a great assist for me, because I have a paper with Marios Angeletos which captured exactly what he said, namely that perhaps mobility is not very different in reality, but if I think that effort matters a lot, I put a lot of effort. I want less taxes because I don't want to be taxed because I accept inequality with effort. The self-fulfilling, and that's the US. In another equilibrium, I believe that effort does not matter. I don't put any effort. We don't grow. I want a lot of redistribution. We grow even less, and that's the US. So the separation of perception versus the reality, which is more similar, is actually at the basis of some other work I've done. And whether the reality, you say there is not much difference, whether this is big or small is I don't know, in the eye of the beholder, but yes, it's not. It would be interesting this afternoon or later this morning to see the paper with 15 countries to see. Your second question about what did you say? What was the question? Income distribution and oh yeah, I mean, right. You say when there is a lot of inequality, it's difficult to make it to the very top. Again, I think I answered before. Don't think about, you make an example of making the top 1%. That's not the question. The question is making the top quintile is much more likely to be in the top than the top 1%. Left and right, controlling for that. First of all, rich people are more pessimistic. So yeah, we haven't done those. I don't think we've done this regression, but I'm not 100% sure what it means. Not 100% sure what it means to be left or right after you control for everything. Then really, you are left because you are poor, or
we mean we do the same job, we have the same income, and it means we have the same job, same income, but simply I'm right and you are left.
It's probably there are very few people that are that way, but still, we could do that. Well, but
remember,
we were asking.
Different things.
Yeah, we were asking.
You are capturing other other issues.
We can do that. We have all the data to do that. Yeah.
I mean, you can. There are these methods about matching where you try to match people with the same characteristics.
We can do that. Yeah.
Different beliefs.
Right. We have all the data to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so now another few questions from Giuseppe Maschi, and then here, Professor Schizzarotto here in the first.
Yes, I wanted to ask something about mobility from top end to bottom end, because I think this is not really tackled. First of all, we don't have a general view of that in your speech and presentation, and the only bit is about children moving from, on that animation, from one children moving from one end to the other, without any numbers. How many? What is the percent? I must say that in a board of directors...
there are numbers.
Yeah. No, they weren't. When you show the children moving, unless I'm wrong.
Oh, the movie, you mean?
Yeah, the movie. Oh,
yes. Okay.
It was just
yeah.
But very few, for instance, in the board of directors would be very, very, very bad number. So I think that we need to specify this. And I think there is a lot of lack of attention to the mobility from top end to the bottom. I did a tiny bit of research, a bit on the internet. I pulled out an old book that I have in Salina from my friends now, deceased Professor Miliband, who wrote about social classes in England. And basically there is no downward mobility from the top centile, say, of people to... And this is a big problem, because if you think this from the perspective of a business, you have almost a monopoly. Imagine that now we had business, 1% of top business, that they never move downwards. Their value never decreases through crisis or good. And not only, through generations, this thing keeps increasing. Then you have a massive problem. And this problem has got to be tackled.
Here.
Well, I appreciated your paper very much, but I still have a question. I mean, I'm not really convinced about your explanation of why Europeans are much more pessimistic regarding the level of social, or let me say, income mobility. I mean, the explanation is Europe experienced feudalism, and this is not the same in the case of US. But let me say that feudalism ended, say, 800 years ago. And do you believe that there is still a memory of this?
Absolutely.
No, let me say, okay, let me. I mean, I'm fully aware that path dependence is, how can I say, a mechanism explaining a lot of economic and social phenomena, but it might be that there are some more recent reasons, let me say, to explain that. It might be that US has a much more dynamic economy. The per capita income is much higher. They experience...
Compared to this country, it's about 20% higher.
Okay, but in case of Italy and France, at least, it should be true.
25%.
I don't. Okay, but also because they experience much more geographical mobility. So I mean, it might be that there are some, how can I say, much more recent events that can explain
such as
this difference. Sorry?
Which is that?
That I mentioned. I just mentioned.
You mentioned that they are richer, but you mentioned that the US is richer. I think these are all rich countries. I don't think that they're not that different. No, I vastly disagree with you. I think that I believe in historical importance of things that happened, and there's a big literature actually on that, which I won't go into. But yes, I do believe that, you know, feudalism have generated certain views. As I said, Marx and Engels were saying, you know, communism will never take hold in the U.S. because of the reason, and communism did not take hold in the U.S. for this reason. And yes, in Italy, in France, we are still thinking, when we think about wealth, we think about count, viscount, barons. In the U.S., if you think about wealth, you think about the Carnegies and the Mellon. I think that I actually think it's. So yeah, I completely disagree with you. I think it's remarkably important. Of course, there are many other things that have happened throughout history, but these historical differences, also the flow of immigrants coming from everywhere, becoming rich. You know, the Italians 100 years ago were the poor immigrants, and then many of them became super wealthy. We haven't seen that much of that in Europe. In Europe, so these are more, I mean, not Italians, but I mean, immigrants from other countries becoming super wealthy. We haven't seen as much yet in Europe. So being a country of immigrant, self-made immigrant, made a big difference. So these are more recent differences. So I don't think that the level of income of GDP versus these other countries is particularly important. Sure, if we compare the United States with Ghana, maybe the difference in income will be critical, but these are rich countries. I wouldn't say that the level of income in the US versus Sweden I don't think is much of a factor. On the previous question of upward mobility or lower mobility, first of all, let's be clear about one thing. We are talking about ratio, so if there are people, so if people move up, there have to be people moving down, because arithmetically, if you move up, there has to be some people that move down. Maybe in the top quintile, the top 1% never moves down, which is actually not true. If you look at downward mobility in the US, there's actually quite a lot of downward mobility. So contrary to common beliefs, the 1% within the US is not the same people. It moves up and down a lot. Now, I don't know about England, but certainly in the US, the top 1%, there's a lot of downward mobility. In fact, if I presented the number of downward mobility, you would be shocked about how much there is. Having said that, we actually explored at the beginning of the survey. We tried to ask people about downward mobility as well, forcing them to internalize the fact that if there are 100 people moving up, there have to be 100 people moving down, and the whole thing needs to be squared away. We got a lot of confused answers, so we decided to abandon the downward mobility part and only ask about upward mobility, but I am aware that it is a limitation. Regarding the movie, actually the movie is not that, there are bound, you cannot show people false information, and the movie by law, and I think the movie actually is not false, because if you have counted, there are 9 poor children. Of them, only 1 become rich. If by becoming rich you mean moving from the bottom to the top, 1 out of 9 is actually pretty close to reality. It's somewhere around 8 in the US, and 1 out of 9 is pretty close to reality for Europe and the US. We are not showing them actually false information. Yeah.
Of the top centile,
top 1%, yeah.
Top 1%, or even better, let's say the top 0.1%. How many people have moved from the top 0.1% in percent?
For top 0.1%, I don't know the actual number. I don't have the top of my head, no. but it's much higher than you think. Maybe top 0.1%, I don't know, but the top 1% is remarkably high.
Maybe Giovanni can do the calculation.
Maybe Giovanni can do the calculation on the
spot with the data, or otherwise this afternoon. So we create.
But the number is you don't seem to believe me, but let me assure you that I don't remember the number, but let me tell you. Me too.
It's more than you think. It's more than you think.
Well, you seem to think this is about 0, but it's not. I'm not talking about the English one at about the time of the I'm talking about the U.S. today. The U.S. today is quite high. I think I don't want to draw a number, but
okay. So let me say another couple of things. First of all, if you want to ask questions, you are welcome also to ask questions in Italian, of course, and then we can translate and you can reply in Italian or in English. And second thing is that coffee is not coming before 15 minutes, so if you have another few questions, that would be great. Yeah. Almost ready. Okay, but still, if you have another couple of questions.
Everybody runs out.
Yes, exactly.
Everybody just runs.
That's Italy.
So I have a question, if nobody is... So I see the point of giving the same treatment to everybody, like making everybody more pessimistic. But I was thinking in terms of, from a policy perspective, maybe the most important thing would be just to give the right information to people, right? So let me tell you another experiment that some people did. So we are adding the third experiment today. So this was about immigration. So as we said before, as Fondazione De Benedetti, we have been working a lot on immigration. And I ran into this survey in which they were asking people, are you afraid of immigrants, or you dislike immigrants, or whatever? And of course, everybody in the survey right now was complaining about immigration, right? But then they selected a random sample of respondents, and they gave them the exact percentage of immigrants over the total population in a given country. So like in Italy, you would learn that immigrants currently represent 7 to 8% of the resident population, okay, which is much, much lower than what
only for Italy?
No, this has been done in different countries, also in the US and Germany, and I don't know. It's something very similar to your survey. And then they were asking the same information, and just getting access to the true information was lowering dramatically how much people dislike immigrants or are afraid of immigration. Okay, so going back to your case, wouldn't just be the right policy to say, look, your probability of moving from the bottom quintile to the top quintile in the US is not whatever, 20%, is 10%, then it's up to you to think whether this is still the American dream or not, and whether you want more or less taxation. So if you ever thought about running this alternative experiment. Then again, if there are other questions, yeah, there's one more there.
Alberto, I'm also wondering if you tried to frame the questions around taxation, because one thing that's very interesting is, of course, in the U.S. tax rates were much higher. Not in such a long memory behind. If you look before the Reagan tax cuts, top marginal tax rates were, in the low 70s, I think. So a little bit of this phenomenon of really low taxes. It's pretty recent. So I'm actually probably the only American in the room. So for me, I'm always been really fascinated about how this became the new norm. How come when you talk to Americans now and you ask them, I don't know if you ask these same questions about whether people's perceptions around taxes. Because when I teach this stuff, I'm also really always very surprised about how, I mean, Americans really think they're much more taxed than they are, right? I mean, Donald Trump can go around and say, we're the highest tax country and one of the highest tax countries.
Well, he can say a lot. He says a lot of things.
No, he can say a lot of things. No, but I think people believe that one, right? I mean, people don't believe a lot of stuff that he says. I mean, the U.S.
Hopefully.
Only countries in the OECD that have lower overall taxes than the U.S. are Chile and Mexico. So I mean, it's really. Yeah. I mean, Americans have this warped perception about a lot of things, not just inequality. So I'm kind of wondering how that also fits within why people don't want to raise taxes. Whether it's also about their information about taxes. I mean, that's not in your survey, I don't think, at this point, but maybe it's something that's worth asking too about how people perceive what people actually perceive tax rates are, you know, and things like that. I mean, I think they know what they actually are, but perceive them relative to the rest of the.
Well, on your question, we did not quite ask exactly what you are saying, but we asked them, do you think that in your countries taxes are too high? And we actually, surprisingly, we got very reasonable answer that those who said taxes are too high were people in France and Sweden, and not so much in the US. We did not use them in the paper, so I don't have a complete recollection. But I do remember that we were asked. We didn't put them in the paper because it was long, but we did ask a lot of questions about how informed people were about what the taxes were in their country. So we did ask actually those questions. I don't remember what the answer were. The only thing I remember is that French and Swedes think that their taxes were too high, and this was before. Well, actually, this was right during the campaign, actually, during the Trump campaign, so we could see. But so basically, I think we asked those questions, but I don't remember exactly what the answer were. But one related point is this polarization between left and right was actually particularly strong in the U.S. So in the U.S. it was pretty clear that the left thought that the government was the answer to the problem of low social mobility, and the right thought that the government was the cause of low social mobility, and the right wanted to lower taxes to increase social mobility. On your question, Paolo, we thought a lot about it, and if you tell people the right number, you're moving the U.S. in making them more pessimistic. And we have two issues. One, if you move if you tell people the right number, which was our initial idea, you move the U.S. in making them more pessimistic, and in the European in making them more optimistic. Then you look at the result, and in order to compare the two, you have to assume that movement in both directions are the same, and that was problematic. The second was that we, as economists, think that if the difference between your perception and reality is 20%, and it goes from, say, 11% to 8%, you think, oh my God, this is huge. As a response, well, 8%, 11%, who knows? You know? So we were afraid that giving an exact number might have been a little bit less shocking than showing a little movie. So we were not interested in, this is not about providing information. This is about shocking views about mobility, to see a causal reaction between shocks about perception of mobility and their policy preference. So it's not about providing information. In fact, in some ways, we're making Europeans even less informed because we make them more pessimistic. It's a trade-off. We follow this avenue. But regardless, your question about immigration, we should talk more because that's something we're also thinking of doing. So.
Just follow up. So I think it was fascinating that what you said, that the right-wingers didn't respond to this movie. Well, they responded in the sense that they thought mobility was lower than it was, but they didn't respond in terms of willingness to redistribute.
Zero.
And your hypothesis was that they saw the government as the problem rather than solution. Right? So the reason for this pessimism was the government. But I guess an alternative approach could be that the right-wingers, they don't care so much about the economy, they care about social values. So if you vote, right, you care about religion and traditional values and abortion laws and gay rights and gun laws, and so you don't. So somehow the Republican Party or whatever they have duped this group, and this is according to the what's wrong with the Kansas.
Let me just clarify one thing that I mentioned probably too briefly. Precisely because we were concerned about what left and right may mean and so on. I don't remember on top of my head. You can find them all in the paper in the appendix. But our question about are you left wing or right wing were formulated try to extract views about whether you're left wing or right wing on economic issues. And there are a lot of those social values, deeply religious Americans, that are not exactly free market types. So we tried to define left and right as on economic issues, but yes, perfectly possible that still there is some sort of bunching up of issues. And interesting, as you probably know, there is a literature of a few papers who show that argue that for the U.S. the right strategically uses religion and gay rights and all of that in order, what they're really interested in passing pro-rich legislature, and they put around this stuff to get strategically to get votes.
Okay, so sure.
In the US, the probability of moving from the top 1% to below the median, so in the bottom 50%, is 20%.
Right. So just in case you didn't hear, the number that we were trying to get at, if you are in the top 1% of the population in the US, you have a 20% chance of your children ending up below the median, below 50%. Personally, I find that huge.
Yes, but sorry, can I say something on that?
Sure.
That the top, that's why I was interested in top 0.1%. The top 1% in the US, we're talking about $220,000 roughly.
300,000, yeah.
$300,000, 220,000 euros. With that amount of money, you don't manage to accumulate capital. In order to generate the proper accumulation of capital, you have to enter into the 0.1%. You have to enter in an income about $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And the process, and I just read Thomas Piketty because I'm not a professor, I just read things around. And my understanding is that when you enter in that phase that you can accumulate capital properly, then you're very unlikely to go downward. And the problem of the absence of downward mobility in certain social classes is as much as a problem of firms or businesses that they cannot go down. You create a sort of monopoly, you start creating a sort of rate of influence which is very large. And you create problem even for the people who live in that kind of situation. Because I promise you, it's not an ideal situation even for the people who live with that kind of income.
We wish I had that problem.
Yeah, I wish as well. Okay, so thanks a lot to everybody for a nice session. So we will resume here at 11. Sorry, we will resume here at 11:30 for the presentation of the new report of the World Bank. Thank you.
Where it's in Valleditri, it's in between close to Marta.
Thank you. It was great.